No, it's just Dr. Michael Muller-Karpe. I'm archaeologist, researcher at the Römisch-Germanisches Zentralmuseum in Mainz, Germany. I'm coordinating their research projects in cooperation with the Iraqi Antiquities Department. I myself mainly do research on Mesopotamian material of 3rd and 2nd millennia. Mm-hmm. And my special field is metalwork, metal technology, craftsmen. I'm interested in metal workshops, then in graves, and all the information you can retrieve from excavating and analyzing graves of the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC. In our institution, the Römisch-Germanisches Zentralmuseum, we have a project doing research on elite, the coming up of the first elite in human society. So in this field I'm also working on the Royal Cemetery of Ur, a re-evaluation and a re-documentation of the material from Ur.
And you've recently returned from Iraq?
Yes, a week ago. I had the opportunity to go to Iraq for a week, and so I spent 5 days visiting the Iraq Museum. You see, we have a cooperation, our museum, a cooperation with the Iraq Museum, and we're trying to help our colleagues in this very difficult situation about restoration.
Repeat the last thing that you said.
You're helping the colleagues in Iraq.
Okay, well, we have a cooperation with the Iraq Museum in several fields, the field of restoration of archaeological objects, of publication, and other fields. And the purpose of my visit last week was to explore the possibilities and the fields in which we could help our colleagues in these very difficult situations, in these difficult days in Baghdad. So, as you know, the lootings last year had a disastrous effect on the Iraq Museum. Our colleagues have so far cleaned the entire museum, so if you compare the pictures which you might have seen after the looting, a devastated museum has changed a lot. It's everything clean now. The smashed doors are replaced. They have furniture, computers. Actually, it looks pretty normal now. But the problem is that when they cleaned the floors of the storerooms, they put everything back into the nearest shelf. So everything is mixed up because the looters just vandalized the entire storerooms. And to put all these shelves back to normal, this will take ages. It's a very time-consuming work they have to do. They have to go back to their registers, which fortunately are preserved. They were not affected by the lootings, but they have to check object by object. And so far they found 15,000 objects missing, but this number is preliminary. It might rise while they are checking, so that it might reach 25,000, 30,000. We don't know.
Yeah, is this your first visit to Baghdad since the looting, or were you there immediately afterwards?
Yes, it's the first time I come back. I was there shortly before the war, and now it's the first time.
I have a little question about, wonder if you could address the statements by the Pentagon and the U.S. that many objects have been recovered. Or is that just a lie?
No, this is true. Many thousands.
Yes, it's true. You see, there are several aspects to that. Right after the war, there was this committee set up by the American Customs, I think, Attorney Bogdanos. He was head of the team, and they did a very good job in tracing objects. So objects were confiscated. They actually found them. They could trace them. Then there were a good number of objects were brought back by looters, and also brought back by people who actually saved them. There are stories that people came to the director of the museum, Tony George, telling him that when they saw that the Iraq Museum was looted, they would go there, take objects, keep them at home, and then they brought them back when there was a better situation. And at the borders and the airports, there were several objects found. So a good number has returned, but as I said, 15,000 are still missing.
Let's wait until
Just wait a second. One of the many things that is missing, of course, from the
you can ask the question.
I'll ask the question. You can think about it. One of the many things, of course, that's missing from the Baghdad Museum is the entire cylinder seal collection. And obviously I know the answer to this question, but it might be nice to have you address it. I think that to most people cylinder seals are just some sort of funny little object. Why in the context of Mesopotamia is this such a... I mean, I can ask somebody else the question. It's just good to have some archaeologist explain it. Obviously, I mean, I know the answer to the question. In a land where there's not a lot of stone, this is the iconography that we have for Mesopotamia. So I think that the public doesn't understand how important losing this entire collection of cylinder seals is in terms of losing a historical artifact. But let's skip that question because I'm afraid that we're not going to have enough time to cover. I can get that out of another archaeologist.
Yeah.
So why don't we well, I guess since 2001, you and I have had a variety of discussions about looting and how this occurs and how objects enter into the art market and some of the ways in which this could be prevented. Perhaps that's something that we can speak a little bit about. And you can start wherever you like. So we could talk a little bit about, first of all, how objects enter the market in Iraq. How are they looted? How do they then enter private collections through auction houses or through private dealers? What does it mean for dealers to collect from for collectors to collect in terms of moral and ethical aspect? And what can we do to begin to limit this looting, whether it's, you know, by stigmatizing either scholars or collectors or doing something? What can we do to begin to deal with this problem of losing our heritage through this antiquities trade?
Well, there's a lot.
And you can speak about this.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Yeah. Well, to start from the practical point of view, it's very, very simple that the looting apparently is done by locals, by local farmers. But the problem is we can't blame these poor farmers because they apparently don't have the means, the possibility to feed their family in a decent way. So they are not the ones to blame for. We have to be realistic. The lootings, we wouldn't have the lootings if there were not a market for these looted items. Without the market for these items, we wouldn't have the lootings, we wouldn't have illicit excavations, and we wouldn't have thievery. So it is not the poor farmer, it is the person who actually buys the object, who spends money on these objects. And everybody who pays for excavated objects has to be aware that he actually sponsors the destruction, and he takes the responsibility for the destruction.
Why do you think people purchase these artifacts? Is it an addiction? Is it about status? Is it about beauty? what are some of the motivations that these people might have for collecting something that is so closely involved in the destruction of all of our cultural heritage?
Well, I think there's a variety of motives. Let's start from one point, from the criminal point of view. There are people apparently who just don't care about our archaeological heritage, who just want to make money, and who accept that whatever it costs, the only important thing is their own profit. This is, I think, only one fraction of the motives. In this field also belongs investment into antiquities. I think the decisive year in this respect was the beginning of the 1990s. There was a tremendous demand in the world market in Mesopotamian material, but since many institutions like museums would not accept to buy recently looted objects, they tried to get material from, as it said, old collections which had come out of the ground a long time ago. And in the beginning of the 1990s there was an auction by the Erlenmeyer collection. Erlenmeyer was a rich Swiss collector with a huge collection, an old collection. And during this auction, the prices rose by 10, 20, even 50 times. So they just exploded. And from then on, Mesopotamian material was very much asked for in the market, and a new group of people came into the market. Before, it was only collectors who were interested in the material. But from then on, this kind of antiquities became an investment for speculation, because it was material which rose within a few hours by 10, 20, 50 times. It's a fantastic profit you can make with it. So from then on, the demand for Mesopotamian material just exploded. At the same time, in Mesopotamia, we had a decline of the central power. Saddam was defeated in Kuwait, and illicit excavations started in Mesopotamia to feed this demand. So this is when the problem actually started. And towards the end of the 90s, the Antiquities Department slowly started to cope with the problem. They started excavations in the sites and to end this looting. But after the fall of Saddam and the fall of the central government, the looters came back.
Oh boy. Here we are rolling.
Okay.
By the way, I should add, just for your knowledge, that it's not just the Erlenmeyer collection, but just before that, the Moore collection was auctioned off.
And it also went up.
Absolutely, because it was one of the great provenance collections that had been published as an Oriental Institute publication. Remember, they published the Brett collection. This is in the 40s and 50s. Then Ada Small Moore, who was a New York socialite, and her son, who was I don't know, some sort of priest, or I'm not so familiar with the ranks of the clergy in New York, inherited the collection from her, and that went on sale at Sotheby's in New York.
Well, the entire topic perhaps you can do. You don't need me for saying that.
I just
you know better than
no,
I
I
do.
just give it to you as a piece of information, just
Yeah.
you know, for your own fun.
Yeah. Well, this is the second category, but the third category of people who buy these objects and somehow take the responsibility for this destruction are people who are really interested in the material, who like archaeology and who want to support archaeology. And I've talked to several private collectors, and they said, well, they think that if they buy them, these objects, they do something good for the objects because they will be kept in a ideal environment, environment-controlled atmosphere, and in a secure circumstance. So these people are really interested and they really care for antiquities. But I think they should be aware what they actually do, and the result of their doing, in fact, is destruction. As I said, it's not the poor farmer you can blame. It's the person who spends money on the objects. And
It's my
it's
stomach.
Okay.
What?
Repeat that last sentence. It's not the poor farmer.
Just repeat the last sentence.
Okay. Well,
It's not the poor farmer.
It's not the poor farmer you can blame for this for the destruction. It's the person who spends money, who pays for these items. Because, as I said, without a market for illegally excavated objects, we wouldn't have illegal excavations. So,
Well, when we talk about destruction, I think maybe this is something that the public doesn't understand, and maybe you can better explain it to them. That we're talking not just about the destruction of a physical archaeological site, we're talking about the destruction of all the information that goes along with the artifact. So what is the value of the artifact when it's removed from its context? What are we losing when an artifact appears on the market and simply becomes an aesthetic thing in a museum, an art piece, as opposed to something that we know?
You see, in the public discussion or the public awareness is too much focusing on objects, on the material value of an object, objects being stolen. But that doesn't even touch the core of the problem. The problem is not that objects are stolen. Stolen objects can be confiscated, they can be returned to the rightful owner. But the thing is that the value of an object for mankind, for the history of mankind, is associated with the information which the object carries. And the main body of information which an object can convey to us is not connected to the very object, but it's connected to the connection of the object in the earth. So if we lose this connection, if we lose this context in the ground, we lose the main body of information and the actual value. You see, if we compare an archaeological site with a history book, we mean that in a literary sense. An archaeologist reads in the layers of a site as in the pages of a history book by excavating. This reading that is excavating is destroying in the same way. So what remains from this reading is what the archaeologist has understood from this reading, the documentation of what he has understood. Excavating without this documentation is like tearing out single letters from a history book. Single letters torn out of a book have lost their meaning, have lost their value. And the same thing happens to objects without context. So what we have in the market actually are single letters torn out of our history book. They are worthless. They might be nice to look at, but they have lost their value. So we should not acquire these single letters torn out of our history book. And therefore I think we really should end this trade in single letters.
What-
Specific examples?
What is the best way for us to end the trade in single letters? How can we pressure these collectors, or alternatively, would it be important to pressure scholars who authenticate such objects? Do these objects gain value when a scholar like you or I comes and authenticates it? What is the impact of that on the marketplace?
Well, there are several aspects to this question. Of course, number one applies to my fellow colleagues, my fellow archaeologists. Nobody should authenticize an object, because this raises the price, and this is a direct collaboration to this trade, which directly destroys the evidence which we are interested in and we are working on. So no archaeologist can cooperate in this trade. On the side of the collectors, I would say he should realize what he is actually doing by buying objects. So he should be embarrassed in this doing. If he wants to protect our shared archaeological heritage, he should refrain from buying this. But there's a third point, and this is the legislator. There are several countries in this world who have not yet ratified the UNESCO Convention of 1970. Under this Convention of 1970 and 1995, an individual state agrees to respect laws other states have implemented to protect the historical heritage. So in those states who have not ratified, it is still legal to buy and sell objects which, according to the laws of Iraq, are stolen. And this should not be possible. Germany, the country where I come from, unfortunately is one of these countries. And since Britain and Switzerland, who were one of the big countries for antiquities dealers, have signed last year, month by month it becomes more embarrassing for Germany not having ratified. But there are a few other countries, unfortunately, also. Few countries. Most countries have already ratified. So this is, I think, imperative first to ratify these two conventions and also to implement them into national law.
Can you imagine a day when, instead of having an antiquity in your living room, if you're a collector, or having a great collection of these things, instead of this being a point of pride, it would be something that would actually stigmatize a collector?
Yes, I would say it's a point of shame to have single letters torn out of our history book sitting somewhere in my living room or my hall, and people coming and telling you, well, you have this kind of thing. It's like collecting organs of children. You tear out their eyes and display them in your front hall. Somehow you can also compare archaeological sites with eyes of our children, because these archaeological sites are unique opportunities, or it's like windows into the past, into a world of people who are separated from us by time. It's their world, but it's also our world. And if we destroy this window or destroy these eyes through which we can look into their world, it destroys also a decisive part of our own history. And if you ask what is a human being, if it's more than a beast who eats and multiplies itself, this being really should take care of his cultural roots. It's the historical consciousness who constitutes us as human beings, and we cannot allow to to destroy this cultural consciousness, to this cultural memory of mankind. And this is exactly what happens right now in Iraq. If you look at these horrible pictures, aerial photographs of looted archaeological sites, you have one pit beside the other. It's total destruction. And all the information which was in these sites is destroyed. You have to imagine these are cities which for 5,000 years have survived almost untouched, the ruins of these cities. The houses, the foundations of the houses, of the temples, of the workshops were still in the ground. The people which were buried there were still in the ground. So if we would have excavated these sites, we could have gotten a lot of information about our ancestors. And it's not only the archaeological evidence which is lost, it's also written documentation. As you know, in Mesopotamia, writing was invented, so we have a lot of clay tablets which were still in the ground, and they were taken out of context. There might be some information still in a tablet, but if you have a complete library, a complete set of letters, you have the replies to letters, and you can make a relation to each letter, all this information is lost.
Can you give an example of a library like this that has been dug up, that has been looted and dispersed?
Yes, there is a good number of tablets. From the context, we know that these tablets apparently come from Umma, which is a big important site in southern Mesopotamia and Sumer. These tablets date to the end of the 3rd millennium. They confiscated several hundred complete tablets in the border, but as every archaeologist who has worked in Mesopotamia knows, complete tablets are the exception. Usually you'll find fragments during an excavation. So before a looter found a complete tablet which he could sell, he probably found hundreds and hundreds of fragments. And since these tablets usually are not burnt, they are not fired, they're just clay, these fragments were left on the surface, and after the first rain they were destroyed. So you imagine for 5,000 years these tablets were preserved in the ground, and literally the last moment before they could be read by an archaeologist, they just disappeared. They are lost forever. So it's not only the context in the ground which is destroyed, it's also objects which are destroyed.
When we speak about this kind of archive, how many tablets are we talking about? Are we talking about hundreds of tablets, thousands of tablets, tens of thousands of tablets? An archive like Umma, or an archive like Nippur that we actually know.
Oh, we have archives with several thousand.
Lagash.
Yeah, we have archives with several thousand tablets, and as I understand, there have already appeared in the market several hundred or even thousand of tablets. So apparently in the past years they found several archives.
What sort of information do these archives contain? Are we talking about archives of literary texts, letters between people? Do they show economic organization, social organization? Why are these tablets important? Why are these libraries important?
You have all kinds of libraries. You have economic libraries that gives you information about the economic life. You have literature. You see, the old Mesopotamians, they were just enthusiasts in writing. They copied and copied and copied again, and they collected old texts. So you have a whole variety of information from these libraries.
So we're also speaking about libraries that aren't just the equivalent of a state or government archive. We're talking about libraries that, in a sense, these people were collecting their own past. They were looking back at their own literary traditions and their own history and their own systems of writing and their own systems of language. I mean, for instance, Sumerian was being lost at some point and was being recompiled and kind of indexed during a much later period.
Yeah,
I mean, are these historians we're talking about? Are we talking about ancient historians?
yeah, you might call them like that, because they recorded almost everything. They recorded daily life, but they also recorded philosophical thoughts. So it's a unique possibility to look into their way of thinking, and I think we can learn a lot from the way they were thinking. How they saw themselves, how they saw others, how they treated their own mistakes, what they learned from their own mistakes, and I think we could learn a lot from them.
When we talk about human history and about preserving our past, obviously there's a lot of the past out there. Theoretically, one would want to preserve all of it. But what specifically is it about Mesopotamia or about Sumer that is so important? What stage do you feel that this marks in our evolution as a species, as human beings? What happened there?
Well, as everybody knows, Mesopotamia is the cradle of civilization. But what does it mean? I mean, almost all the important inventions without which we would be nothing were invented there. Let's take a car. Without having a wheel, how could you have a car? Let's take a computer. Without the idea of having recorded speech, that is writing, there won't be a computer. The same applies for mathematics. You have the invention of mathematics in Mesopotamia. Let's take space, our voyages in the space, also the research in space, astronomy was invented in Mesopotamia. So wherever you go in our modern world, you finally end up with an invention from our ancestors in Mesopotamia. So if we protect the heritage of Iraq, we protect the heritage of our own culture, our own roots.
Do you think that this is something that is poorly understood? I mean, I come from America, you come from Europe, but I was brought up as a child to look back to our ancestors as being the Greeks and the Romans. I never thought about the Mesopotamians or the Sumerians as being my ancestors. I thought of them as well. They're sort of vaguely related, but they're somewhere in the East or in the Middle East. Do you think that that's a common perception that needs to be corrected in some way? Are we all Mesopotamian in a way?
Yes. I think all of us, we are children of Mesopotamia, the Greeks included. The Greeks might be our parents, but our grandparents were living in Mesopotamia. So we are all the children of the Sumerians.
I have a question. When you were talking about the context issue and tearing things out of context, it would be great for us to be able to show some pictures of a specific site. Are there pictures that we can get?
We can get those.
You can speak to specifically.
Well, he's spoken about Uma. That's one that's easy to get some
we have
photos
pictures of that?
Yeah, the carbonary. We put them out there.
Well, there are still photos, but there are also films made by several journalists. There's the ZDF, Zweite Deutsche Fernsehen.
Yeah.
They have pictures which are unpublished. Then there's a journalist, her name is Joanne Farhan. She's Lebanese and she traveled considerably in southern Mesopotamia. And she has fantastic
Those would
pictures.
be good to get.
Pardon me?
Those would be good to get. We should figure out how to get in contact with them.
I can give you her email or phone number.
That would be great.
Yeah, I have it. I don't have it here, but I could give it
Do
to
you have any photographs, access to photographs yourself? For instance, like the ones we saw last night.
Walter Sommerfeld?
Yeah.
There are photographs in the internet.
Yeah.
The ones I showed day before yesterday, they are from Safe Antiquities
Yeah,
Now.
you gave me
know
that,
yeah.
our website.
Well, I took pictures in the late 1990s, but there are better pictures now.
About before and after.
That was when the looting had started, so it's an early stage of the looting.
Let me ask you one other question, which is just a question of cultural attitudes, because I think that Americans have had a very different experience in the 20th century than Europeans have. A lot of Europe witnessed a tremendous amount of destruction during the 20th century. Some of it was destruction that countries brought upon each other, some of it was destruction they brought upon themselves. Do you think that the types of cultural attitudes that you're talking about are somehow shaped by this experience? Do you think that what happened in Iraq, that perhaps some of this has to do with the type of cultural isolation that Americans experience? I mean, this is obviously speculation, it's just opinion.
Well, I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't say that because the American culture and the European culture is the same culture. We are both eating McDonald's hamburgers and drink
Right.
Coca-Cola, and somehow speak the same kind of languages. So the way of thinking, I think, is not that much different. And we use the same mathematics,
Right.
which was invented by the Mesopotamians, and the idea of writing we also owe to the same
Well, I'm really talking more.
parents. But
We never had a Dresden. This is what I'm talking about, that in a way, here we are in Austria for this conference, and it's amazing to see that there's a entire section of the military here that is devoted to the preservation of cultural patrimony during times of war or armed conflict. The United States had no preparations like this. Do you think that that has something to do with what Europe experienced during the 20th century?
well, that's what I hear. But actually, I don't believe it, because you see, I personally did not experience Dresden. I know people who have, but you probably also know people who have, and you heard from these people. So the ways of transmitting this information is the same. I read about these things, and you read about these things. So the level of awareness could be the same. And what has happened in Iraq, I think, is not a matter of mentality or matter of level of awareness of a people. It's more a matter of personal responsibility. And the horrible thing and the horrible mistake that was taken, that was made after the war, was not imposing a curfew. If we had a curfew for, let's say, 5 or 10 days, the first days, we would not have the lootings in the Iraq Museum, or the theft of the explosive we are just now hearing about. And if we would have now the awareness of the responsible people concerning the archaeological sites, they would be protected. But unfortunately, they are not protected. But as I say, these are personal mistakes of people who are in certain positions, and they should be made responsible, not a society or a people or whatever. And I wouldn't see a principal difference between Europeans and Americans in this field. There are a lot of mistakes also in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take Germany. If you take the way Germany produces its energy with brown coal, you see, you make huge pits, 100 meters deep, several square kilometers in size, and in order to get to this coal, you just take out entire landscape, several square kilometers. And you have to imagine whatever has happened in this area. People have lived there for millennia, and what remains from these people is documented in the ground. The surface of the ground is really like a history book. You have documents in the ground, and all these documents are taken out, destroyed, just in order to get to the coal in 100 meters depth. And what are you doing with the coal? You just make electricity, which you waste with stupid old-fashioned bulbs. So it's not only Iraq where we destroy the records of our own history, it's also in Europe. And the same happens in America and in all other countries in the world.
Is this a matter of balancing out our own greed and avarice with
Yes,
our
it's
sense
greed.
of humanity?
It's greed, and it's unawareness, it's stupidity of people who think the only important category is their own profit, and they don't care about other values. But they should realize that the price for this kind of production of energy and the price of ignoring the wealth of archaeological sites in Iraq or wherever is very high. We are losing what constitutes us as human beings, our historical awareness.
So we're losing part of ourselves.
Yes.
What's the how can you tell?
I have the impression it's increasing, but it's not increasing enough. You see this public outcry you had when the National Museum in Baghdad was looted. We really should have it now while the archaeological sites are destroyed, because the amount of destruction, the loss for mankind is is much worse now, what happens in the sites compared to what happened in the Iraq Museum.
Mm-hmm.
It was horrible what happened in the Iraq Museum, and there's no excuse for it. But objects were...
1 second, sorry.
Yeah.
So you'd want to
Yeah.
ask on tape?
If you could just repeat what you just said about the
awareness.
public awareness of the issue,
Yeah.
and how, if it's increasing, and how to help educate people even more.
Yeah. Well, I think the public awareness is increasing, but not enough. If you compare what happened after the looting of the Iraq Museum, now there's no... then we had a public outcry. Everybody was so upset of what has happened in the Iraq Museum. But compared to the events of then, what happens now is much worse. In the Iraq Museum, objects were stolen, but stolen objects can be found and can be given back to its rightful owners. But the problem with the losses now is that the context in the ground is lost in the archaeological sites and looted sites, and the information which is inherent in the archaeological context, if it's lost forever. It's irreversible loss. So this is really something everybody should be aware of, and we really should have to do something about it.
I wonder myself as a Near Eastern archaeologist, and this is something that I was discussing with one of our colleagues last night, whether in a way major archaeology in Iraq may be finished because of this. That when you look at, these sites, like Umma, great capital cities of empires like the Theos and Larsa Empire, the major sites are so pockmarked that I wonder how one could even excavate there. Will we be living in a world where future research in places like Iraq consists of digging at marginal sites? How much have we lost?
We cannot even estimate what we have lost, but the photos we have seen indicate that the loss is tremendous. And sites like Umma, Isen, Hafriyat, they really look as if they are lost forever. They're just a landscape of a moon.
So this is like losing Paris or Berlin or...
Well, I
Europe.
actually would compare it to Dresden. It's a complete destruction. And you have to imagine what is a site that there were tens of thousands of people who lived there. Let's take Umma. Perhaps if there lived 5,000 persons at a time. Umma starts from the 4th millennium and was inhabited all through for at least 2, probably 3 millennia. So for 3 millennia you have 5,000 inhabitants at a time. That makes probably 1 million people who actually lived in this site. And whatever happened, yeah?
Repeat that sentence.
You have to repeat that because somebody was dragging it.
Okay.
The microphones are very sensitive.
So if you calculate how many persons actually lived in a site, in a city, a major city like Umma, you might end up at 1 million people who lived there. And what remained from these people is documented or was documented in the ground. And whatever knowledge we could get from these people, we could retrieve from excavating and properly documenting this information which was stored in the ground. And if this is lost, also these people are lost. So if you're talking about several thousand people killed in Dresden, it's 1 million people you just erased from Umma. And these people are lost forever. And all the information we could obtain from these people. So we are not talking about old stuff. You see, it's a widespread prejudice that archaeologists are just interested in objects, in old objects. It's this is as true as the statement that a scholar, how do you call it, Literaturwissenschaftler?
So a natural scientist?
Not natural science, literature. Literature.
Say the word again?
Literaturwissenschaftler, a scholar.
A literary scholar, yeah.
Literary scholar. Okay, it's a wide prejudice that an archaeologist is just interested in objects. This is as true as the statement that a literary scholar is just interested.
You can back up and say it again.
Yeah.
Literary scholar.
A literary scholar.
Yeah.
Is only.
Start at the beginning of the sentence.
Okay.
This
statement is as true as the statement that a literary scholar is only interested in printer's ink. As this scholar, or as words printed, paved the way for this scholar to the way of thinking of a person who has made literature, the archaeologist is also not actually interested in the object, but in the people behind the object. So these objects pave for us the way to these people and connect us to the people. And what happens now in Iraq, that we are cut off from these people. We can no longer learn from these people, from our ancestors. And this is the loss, and this is what we are dealing with.
One more really quick question about, do you know of any programs or have any ideas about how to educate youth, especially little kids, about the value of archaeology and context, sort of to try to educate the next generation?
In a way, adults are lost.
Yeah.
It's too late to educate them. But what you could do is educate the next generation. To give an example of this, when I was growing up, there was no ecological movement. People just did whatever they did with their trash. They did whatever they wanted to the landscape. Today we still have severe problems. but I grew up when this ecological movement was beginning. So to me, ecological issues are normal. In the same way that in Germany, this is even more true. You have a Green Party. Is there a way in which you think that we could educate future generations so that they're more aware of these problems?
I think this ecological movement is a very good example that children are much more advanced in the way of thinking than their parents. And I think also in the history issue, it could be the same way. We really should have better teaching in schools. For instance, when I went to school, history was a minor subject. It was not important. But we really should tell our children it is important for being a human being to have history and take care, cradle our history, and take care of the historical consciousness.
Michael, are there any final comments that you would like to make, or anything that you feel is an important point that we haven't discussed that
No,
you'd like to add to this?
Well, we could go on for decades, but
Well, actually, I
nothing
wish we had the
specific,
time, because I would
Yeah.
love to sit with you here just with a camera for 6 hours, or
Yeah.
for 6 days, or 6 weeks. It would almost be, unfortunately we can't do it, but it would almost be a film in itself just to have a discussion with you. And I
Yeah.
thank you very much.
most welcome.
Obviously, I think you're a tremendous humanist, and, well, I think you know how I feel.
Well, I'm much more optimistic than lots of other people in this respect, I think. But we are fighting against time, and we are losing every minute.